First of all, the criticism of President Biden to meet Vladimir Putin is absurd. Every president since FDR has met with the Russian or Soviet leader. So it's a good thing that they met. I'm glad that they talked about arms control. Obviously, President Biden has extended a New START in March for 5 years. That was constructive. The fact that they're talking about arms control is constructive. The president was right to raise the human rights issues, the issue of poisoning the political prisoners, the issue of cybersecurity attacks. So I think he held his ground and raised the human rights concerns. Now the question is on the details. I mean, we have to get back into the INF. I don't like the fact that our own budget has a Pacific Deterrence Initiative that calls for the development of intermediate nuclear weapons to encircle China. There ought to be arms control agreements, getting back into the INF, making sure we don't have more low-yield nuclear weapons, and really building on New START.
You mentioned the INF, you mentioned START, you mentioned the low-yield nuclear weapons in our defense budget. Given what we heard from both Biden and Putin today on arms control, and these are, of course, the presidents of two countries which basically possess 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, do you believe we're safer this afternoon than we were this morning, or no difference?
Marginally safer, but here's the irony. We're not as safe as we were under President Reagan and President Gorbachev. Let's be very clear. The Biden posture defense budget is more aggressive than what President Reagan wanted. President Reagan and Gorbachev basically agreed to eliminate intermediate nuclear missiles. Trump overruled that. Trump said, let's develop intermediate nuclear weapons. And the current budget, if you look at what President Biden is proposing, basically calls for encircling China with INFs. That is dangerous. It's wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. And we should be talking with Russia about an arms control agreement getting back into INF. We also shouldn't be continuing the low-yield nuclear weapons that Trump pursued. And so right now, I fear that our nuclear policy is a continuation more of Trump than it is actually a return to what Reagan and Gorbachev negotiated.
That's true and depressing. The Congressional Progressive Caucus wrote a letter to Joe Biden ahead of this summit, urging him to use it to, quote, prioritize ways that the United States and Russia can work together to reduce tensions in areas of dispute and cooperate on areas of global importance. Do you think he did that? Do you think he followed the kind of requests that your caucus made? And do you think Joe Biden, who traditionally has been on the hawkish end of the political spectrum, is now listening to progressives on foreign policy or not?
Well, look, he took some criticism for just meeting. I give him credit for that. He has raised the issue of arms control. That is encouraging, but then we have to be willing to follow through on our end on those arms control commitments as well in negotiating. He did raise issues of cooperating on against cyber attacks. I mean, we ought to see if we can have some agreement on cybersecurity where both countries pledge not to go after where both parties pledge not to go after other critical infrastructure. So there's progress, but a lot more needs to be done.
There is an argument, Congressman, not just on the right, but among some long-standing liberal Russia watchers too, that Russia, and in particular Russia under Vladimir Putin, does not understand any language other than the language of force, of pressure, of toughness. Just look at the country's behavior in Syria, in Ukraine. Look at the way it violently deals with its own dissidents. Is that not a fair argument in your view?
Sure, and the president raised the issues appropriately on human rights. We said that there is absolutely no justification for poisoning of political prisoners. There was a call for the release of political prisoners, a call very clearly that we condemn any cyber attacks. So I don't think this president gave any ground, but he was clear that ultimately on issues of climate change, on issues of cybersecurity, on issues of arms control, we have to negotiate and we have to engage in diplomacy.
Just on Russia and Trump, today's meeting was very different from the Trump-Putin summit in Helsinki in 2018, very different, when Trump publicly took Putin's word over his own intelligence agencies at a joint press conference with the Russian president. Your Democratic colleague, Congressman Gregory Meeks, chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, revealed today that his committee and your party is no longer trying to obtain records of the conversations held between Trump and Putin, saying he wants to look forward not back. That's a mistake, isn't it? Why don't Democrats ever want to hold Republicans accountable? All I ever hear from people in your party is look forward, not back, and it's the GOP who benefit.
Well, sometimes looking backwards is necessary to look forward. If you don't understand how President Trump abused the judicial system, how are we going to strengthen the safeguards on the judicial system? If you don't understand how he was able to abuse certain foreign policy conversations where he was throwing our own intelligence agencies under the bus, how are we going to prevent a future president from doing that? So I believe that we should look into that conversation. We should have appropriate safeguards. Maybe the solution is that presidents, when they're meeting foreign heads of state, need to have a few critical advisors with them, and that we want to have more accountability and transparency while protecting our classified information. But that's why it's important to understand what exactly happened.
Indeed. You mentioned the judicial system. One last question on a not unrelated note. Joe Biden was asked by reporters on the tarmac in Switzerland today about Mitch McConnell's recent pledge to block his Supreme Court nominees if the GOP wins back the Senate in 17 months' time. And this is what the president said. Have a listen. Rebalance it. You, I know, have sponsored a bill to introduce term limits for the justices, but instead the Biden administration has just kicked the whole crucial issue into the long grass by just setting up a commission to look into Supreme Court reform. Time is not on your party's side here.
Well, the commission is a reasonable step, but it needs to have recommendations. I think our proposal is a very reasonable one. Give every president 2 appointments and have Supreme Courts do 18 years. It's constitutional because after your term on the Supreme Court, you could still be on a lower court. You could be on an appellate court or a district court. And this would actually depoliticize the court and not allow for the shenanigans that McConnell wanted. Look, McConnell is totally perverting the founding. This was not supposed to be a game to pack the courts. Supreme Court service used to be at the end of your career as sort of an honorific for people for the last few years of service. That's how the founders intended it. And I think it's important for us to talk about reclaiming American founding values.
I'm not sure Mitch McConnell cares about the founders. He cares about power. Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mehdi.